I recently spent 3 months quickly traveling through tax-friendly countries in Europe, and today I'm going to share with you what I found in which places I would consider living. European countries have this reputation for having very high taxes, for being very bureaucratic, having very high regulations, and in many cases that's true. And yet you've seen a number of countries that either have historical tax incentives that may only apply to foreigners in some cases, like Switzerland, for example. And you also see other countries like Portugal and Italy and Greece opening up new tax incentives because they simply need the money. And so I decided to go through a number of places that I thought I might enjoy. I've been to all these places in Europe. In some cases, I had written them off years ago and I haven't been back. But I decided to spend 3 months doing a trip, largely by train through Europe, November, December, and January. So I wanted to see kind of the worst weather of Europe. I wanted to see how I felt about it. And I wanted to go back and feel in countries that I thought would match, my kind of personality, what I actually felt. So the criteria were, I am less interested in living in Southern Europe, so I understand Portugal is popular, Italy has a lot of incentives. For me, I'm looking for efficiency, at least at some level. I already live in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, for example. I've got a great tax deal, I've got a good immigration deal, people are very nice, the weather is great all the time. I mean, things just work. Flights aren't delayed, people aren't going on strike. So to me, it has to be more efficient than that. I'm not saying that Kuala Lumpur is the most efficient city on planet Earth. If I wanted that, I would have gone to Singapore. But I think it's more efficient than a lot of places in Southern Europe. And even when it's inefficient, you get a smile rather than a grumble. And so that was kind of my standard. I want to be above that. So let me just walk you through the trip. Flew from Kuala Lumpur in early November to Istanbul. I wouldn't call necessarily Istanbul. I mean, it is in Europe. It is not the primary nature of this trip. I spoke at an event, and I think that Istanbul is a great place if you want to get a second or third home in another country and you want to qualify for a citizenship that could be part of a passport portfolio. Maybe it's your third citizenship. It is a beautiful city. It's an interesting historical city. I would not be spending, my full life living there. It's just my personal preference. Obviously, all of this is my personal preference. And it's also not, very tax efficient if you're living there on a long-term basis. But I have shown a property that I have in Istanbul, and I love flying Turkish Airlines, and it's always a good reason to lay over there. So I think that's what Istanbul is good for, is having kind of a layover business hub. From there, I went on to Austria. Now, Austria is also not a tax-friendly place, but it is, I think, a place that is more efficient. And so I'd been to Austria a few times. Vienna is a beautiful city, and it never entirely clicked with me, but I wanted to go back. And I have to say, Vienna did click with me more this time. Found some really nice people, found some nice places to eat. Liked the fact that you've got, a certain number of immigrants there from, places in Eastern Europe where I spent a lot of time. So you'd have a nice time at dinner talking to the Serbian waiter, and they'd be very excited to talk to someone who understood that, even though there's certainly many Serbians and Eastern Europeans in Austria. So I liked Vienna, and there are options. There is a self-sufficient visa, for example, if you wanted to move to Austria, that is available. Ultimately, it is not that tax friendly. There are a number of, restrictions because it's a country that it is not Southern European. It has efficiencies, which means that things like renting an apartment are more difficult. And I just decided that, as much as I enjoy visiting, it's probably not a place that I would live. I went onward from there, and we're going to get to the tax friendly part in a minute. Don't worry. I went onward from there for a business meeting in Poland. There are some tax incentives for employees and small business owners and people who make lesser amounts of money if you go and hire people. This is not a place for big business, but if you wanted to base your business in Poland, there are some incentives for you to go there. I have spent a lot of time in Warsaw in the past. I don't think Warsaw is probably the place in Poland that I would choose. I would be probably somewhere in southern Poland, which then presents that it's harder to travel from a city like Wrocław, for example. And so I think Poland, for me, is a little bit in the middle. I had a friend once say, don't be in the middle, right? If you're going to go to Eastern Europe, which Poland likes to proclaim it's not, go somewhere where you're not in the European Union. They have a bit more freedom. People are more laissez-faire. Something like a Serbia, something like a Georgia. Obviously, Warsaw is a bit more developed than some of those places, but I feel like you're not getting much extra than you would living somewhere else. I also don't know that Warsaw is that much more expensive than a place like Belgrade or Tbilisi these days, as those cities shoot up in price. I just don't know if the juice is worth the squeeze there. So from there, went on to my home in Belgrade. Belgrade does have tax incentives for foreigners and people who have businesses internationally. I've talked a lot about Belgrade Belgrade, and definitely think that, again, that's maybe on one side of the spectrum. You don't want to be in the middle, quite frankly, right? I mean, you've seen Poland and Hungary and the Czech Republic have been more difficult on immigration. They don't necessarily want people coming in. And so I think that, Belgrade is a place where we've helped, people move who are looking for more personal freedom, and they do have, a decent financial regime. Now, popped over to Dubai, and then from Dubai came back to Belgrade. All right, now we begin the real meat of my tax-friendly trip through Europe. I went to Switzerland, flew into Zurich, and then quickly transited down to Geneva. So Switzerland is well known for its lump sum tax regime. It's going to cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. One thing people don't know, and it's not a bad investment if you can afford it, is that if you are a citizen of a European state, you get basically half off the lump sum tax deal. You can look at it as you get half off or everyone else pays double. And so we've had clients, for example, who they went and got citizenship in Malta. Maybe they were American. They got citizenship in Malta in a year and change through Malta's MEIN citizenship program by making a donation. And then they were able to go and set up lump sum taxation in Switzerland as the citizen of an EU member state. And they were able to save half. And so one guy saved about $250,000 a year, which gave him about a 3.5-year break even on his Maltese citizenship, which he also used to renounce U.S. citizenship. So in one fell swoop, he basically paid close to $1 million, got out of U.S. citizenship, had an equal quality passport in Europe, and then was able to move to Switzerland and cut his tax bill in half versus what he could have as an American. So Geneva is a very well laid out city. My feeling on Geneva is certainly it's the home of the United Nations, for example, and so you've got a lot of bureaucratic folks. It is more multicultural, and I like the idea of meeting people from all over the world. I like it. I like it more than I did before. I asked myself, would I live here? And with the conditions of Geneva being one of the larger, more well-known cantons, you're going to pay more than you would living in Nidwalden, for example, in the middle of the mountains. Is this a place that I would want to pay $500,000 a year and deal with some of the paperwork? And the answer is there's probably better options than $500,000 a year. I guess that's kind of how I'm wired, is can I go somewhere else? Language, I don't really speak French. You could get around in English. People were friendly. You don't have quite the same, it is still pretty efficient. You don't have quite the same efficiencies as you would in the German part of Switzerland. By the way, I call things how I see them. I'm not here. I understand everyone's got their own little regional, issues and things. I'm just, saying how I see it. The challenge in Switzerland is, buying property is a little harder. I've had people who've told me, well, you can't really buy a property. It's, there's not a lot of, gem properties the way you could buy in other European countries, like, lakefront estates, that kind of thing. And so, as much as I like Geneva, I think, again, good place to visit, but it just doesn't have a feel of a place that you can live. And I just feel like, unless you really have a specific reason to live in Geneva and you really like, let's say you speak French, right? You're not going to live in France and save taxes. So unless you speak French or you have some kind of connection to that region, I think you can probably do better. Now, from there, I took the train up to Lucerne, where I'd been before. And this is a place that I think I could see myself living. Now, the problem is Lucerne is rather small. A lot of places in Switzerland are rather small. Lucerne is really not that much further from the Zurich airport than Zurich itself. So it's not like you can't get in and out. Obviously, the train system is excellent. I was actually on one train that was 3 minutes late, which I'm sure must be some kind of national shame or something. But Lucerne is a small city. You have the Swiss-German culture. There's a certain amount of international. I wonder how long it would take for me to get bored, but if you're just living a normal life and you go to your favorite restaurants and you live at home, I definitely think that, in Europe, it's different than what you'd be used to and what I'm used to in, let's say, Asia, where eating out is almost a better deal. And there's an eating out culture, especially among expats. And I think in Europe, and a place like Switzerland in particular, people are eating at home, you're probably going to bed a little bit earlier, and certainly you're doing that in a place like Lucerne. I could see myself being in Lucerne because you have the tax benefits. Again, it's going to be one of the more expensive ones like Geneva, because not every canton has the tax benefits. But Lucerne to me was the one that stands out if you can stand being in a place that's a bit more calm. And so perhaps for me, someone like me, you spend part of your time in Asia or Dubai, so Kuala Lumpur, Singapore, Dubai, Bangkok, what have you. You get your hustle and bustle in, and then your summer destination, perhaps where you spend enough time and you sign up for tax residence, is in a smaller place like Lucerne. Obviously, lots of hiking, lots of beautiful scenery. Went up to Zurich for a day, no tax deal there. I think Zurich is probably the best city to live in Switzerland, but alas, no tax deal. So I think if you live in Lucerne, you'd have to settle for little day trips up to Zurich, which is exactly what I did. I then took the train from Zurich down to Lake Como in Italy. And Italy is a place that's known for bureaucracy and known for high taxes. And yet, if you have not lived in Italy, you can move to Italy and take advantage of a number of tax exemptions. For Nomad Capitalist, the best one probably being a multi-year €100,000 lump sum flat tax. And so if you want to live with George Clooney along Lake Como, I toured all around Lake Como, had some beautiful cities. I try to compare it to where I'm at in Montenegro, and there are certainly some things that are more charming. Went to one of the absolute best hotels of my life, one of the best lunches, and some of the best service I've ever received at Hotel Villa de Este, which is in just outside of Como along the lake. Absolutely stunning. And so if you're going to live that kind of lifestyle, and you are willing to accept things moving at a slower pace than Switzerland, I mean, €100,000 lump sum, you're going to pay 60, 70, 80% less than you might pay living in Switzerland. I think the procedure's a little bit more simplified, and the process of getting citizenship isn't that much faster, but it's probably easier in Italy, provided you learned Italian, than it would be in Switzerland, where there's a general consensus needed that you've become adequately Swiss. And so, if your goal is to get a second citizenship, but eventually, i.e. you're not going to Europe with a citizenship by descent program, you're not going through the Malta citizenship program, you're just going to work your way there on a residence permit, you're going to get a self-sufficient residence permit or a golden visa. Italy has some advantages. Many countries in Europe will give you citizenship in as little as 5 years. Italy is not, but Lake Como is incredibly impressive. I do feel that, again, all the restaurants, I went to my tailor's favorite pizza restaurant, and I just barely made it there in time, and they're kind of like, all right, like you got to go, we're closing, we have a kind of our afternoon siesta, as it were. And I just felt to myself, one of the great things about living in Asia is so many things are 24 hours a day. There's convenience. And so I'm trying to figure out, how much convenience am I willing to sacrifice to live in a place with natural beauty compared to, again, having to pay a higher tax bill than you would living in Asia. Then took the train down to Milan. I've been to Milan before. Milan's obviously very fashionable. Again, talked to the tailor who lived in Milan, and I said, half the people in restaurants and what have you seem kind of grouchy. And he said, well, that's to be expected. And I had told you previously I was in Milan once before, and I went to pull out one of the polo shirts at a store, and not only the clerk, but one of the customers yelled at me, "Don't touch us the shirts in Italy. What are you touching the shirts?" And so he said, yeah, you're doing pretty well if half the people are grouchy. Now, one of the benefits of living in Lake Como that I thought, we have some folks we've worked with who they just live in villas, and they have a household staff, and they don't really go out very much. And so if you were to, get a 10,000 square foot villa somewhere along Lake Como, that's going to come with some expense, of course. And if you were able to bring in a household staff, obviously in Europe, you can hire people from anywhere in Europe. So you could hire people from, if you want a French chef, if you want, whatever it is you want, they can come and work for you. That may be one way to avoid some of the inefficiencies, just hiring the household staff you want. I'm not sure at Milan prices that the average person is going to be doing that. I mean, I'm looking at apartments that are 250 square meters for, 3, 4, 5 million euros. So Milan, I just don't get. I got in the train. My hotel was not that far from the train station, maybe a kilometer. I said, I'll walk. And I'm just walking over crumpled up sidewalk tiles, and everything's under construction. Everything's weird. Nothing really works that well. And I just say to myself, why is this place so expensive? And I feel like, I'm walking around and you think oh, maybe you'll see a supermodel in Milan. And the answer is, unless you want to go somewhere and ingratiate yourself in the culture that supermodels, for example, hang out in, it's probably not really going to work very well. You're not going to just see them walking around on the street. So I went from Milan down to Monaco, took the train. It's about a 4-hour train, but it went very quickly. And Monaco is interesting. Now, Monaco has this, look, like everything was built in the 60s and 70s, and there's a bit of a dated look to it. There's also a charm to it. The Christmas market in Monaco is actually there was a kitschiness to it that was actually my favorite, and it's right along the port, and it's really nice. Had some really nice service. Monaco is a place that, is difficult to get into because the banks, you have to make a bank deposit and you've got to buy property. The banks have to like you. I tried to meet with some bankers and they're like, oh, we'd be happy to open you an account in Switzerland. I said, well, what if I wanted to move to Monaco? Would you? They said, oh, we don't like your passport. We don't like this. We don't like that. We prefer to deal with Europeans, whatever. And so there are certainly some restrictions in a place that is well known as a zero tax jurisdiction, that they want to be very compliant. And as I'm talking to one of our lawyers there, they're explaining things. And I'm just like, why does it have to be so complicated? This country, that country, things aren't as complicated. They're like, well, that's just how we do it, which for me is never an acceptable answer. So I think that Monaco is a beautiful place. Obviously, you might be paying 100,000 euros per meter for property. So that's like 80 times the price of Kuala Lumpur. Now you can say Monaco is better. Monaco's obviously very small. And so I went to some restaurants. Some were great. Some were not so great. I mean, Café du Paris, I had my second or third bad experience at Café du Paris, and yet I went to one of the rooftop restaurants in the same hotel, and the service was excellent. So I feel like Monaco is kind of, as much as I like the romance of it, it's somewhat the vestige of an era when all these other countries didn't have deals. If you said live in Lake Como or live in Monaco, Monaco does have a glitz to it, and yet, you go to the mall and, like the Gucci store, it seems like, and I walk by Gucci stores all over the world that seem more Tony than this one. And so I like it, but it just seems like to go out and spend, $5 million or $10 million to live in some building that may not even look that nice, and you may not have a great view. It just, it just seems like a bit of a vestige. So I want to like Monaco, and I do enjoy Monaco. Would I put in the money to live there and go through the process, which definitely seems like more of a hassle, and some of the things seem a bit subjective. I'm just not sure that I would do that, but I really enjoy it. And so from there, I went to, Nice just to hang out for a day. Obviously, France is not tax friendly at all, and flew to Malta. Now, I ended up Swiss Airlines. The trains run well, the airline does not. Every single time I tried to select a seat, every single time I tried to do anything, it just got, sorry, change the aircraft, we're going late. So the flight from Nice to Malta through Zurich was delayed, and I ended up spending a night in Zurich at the airport. And I took the opportunity to go down to Zug in Switzerland. Beautiful place. And so that could be on the list. I still think Lucerne is better, but if you're looking at something that's a little bit closer to Zurich, with all the kind of the tech stuff going on, a little bit more active. In the winter, I thought it was beautiful. Everyone says, oh, you want to go to Zug in the summer. Zug could be on your list as well. I eventually went to Malta. Malta has the citizenship program for folks who want to get European Union citizenship, one of the best passports in the world, with $1 million, give or take, cost attached to that. So that's a great deal. Malta has a number of different tax incentives. The challenge is Malta still, as with many of these European countries, has a number of greater restrictions than you would find in terms of getting residence or getting the tax incentives than you would have in the UAE or in Asian countries or in some of the American countries like a Panama or something. And I say to myself, I think Malta is more for someone who is retired. There's not a lot to do. It doesn't necessarily have the glitz of Monaco. It doesn't have the breadth of, like a Lake Como, for example. I don't entirely get it. I have some really nice friends from Malta, and so I want to be nice to Malta. I don't entirely get it. And it's not like you can get on a train and just decide you want to go somewhere else. If you live in Lucerne, okay, I want the bigger city vibes. I mean, you can get anywhere in Europe from, let's say, Switzerland or from northern Italy. You're not doing that in Malta. For me, good place to retire. If you don't want to travel a lot, if you want something that's sleepy, if you want a good tax deal, you're not going to work towards citizenship in Malta. I mean, you're going to be waiting 2 decades to be naturalized in Malta. Again, probably better options. From there, flew up and spent some time in Munich. Not tax-friendly in Germany. Germany does not have a lot of options in terms of immigration if you're an entrepreneur. And that's one reason why Malta's citizenship program, I think, is very interesting, because if you want to live in countries where it's hard to get in as a resident, given that you're an entrepreneur or investor, Maltese citizenship just allows you to do that. So does any citizenship by descent, and that's what Nomad Capitalist is now helping people do. We help people with citizenship by descent as well. If you've got a parent, grandparent, great-grandparent from a European country, that could be your ticket to living in Germany. Germany was never entirely my place. I respect it, love the efficiency. It's a certain, if you're coming from the United States, right, one thing you're gonna find about Central Europe, people don't smile as much. I'm used to that, but I think a lot of people, they go to Germany and Poland, they're like, why aren't people smiling? Then went down, where did I go next? Got on the train, then went back to Austria and went out from there. And then after Christmas, flew to Ireland. Obviously, Ireland does also not have the trains where you can go all around Europe, but Ireland is a beautiful country, and you got to see a little bit of the countryside in Ireland. They have beautiful castle hotels you can go to for the weekend. I happen to think it is one of the great deals in Europe for people who are coming from, let's say, the US or Canadian or Australian culture, where you want to see people smiling, you want to have conversations in English and not, wonder if people are going to be upset with you. I mean, you go to Monaco, there are a few people, not many, but a few who are like, we speak French in Monaco. What are you doing? I didn't realize I had to take a Berlitz class to come for 5 days. But I think Ireland is really one of the great deals because you have, as a foreigner, some level of tax friendliness. Obviously, the corporation tax rate is very low, but you don't necessarily have to have your corporation in Ireland if you have a business. You don't have to move your business there to live there. But Ireland has a couple of different regimes. Even though they just closed down what essentially was their golden visa, it is still possible to move to Ireland. And so for me, the way I felt there I've enjoyed the adventures of, places that are further afield and places that are exotic. What I found after, a dozen or so years of doing this is a little bit of a yearning, not for home, not for the United States, but for a bit of that culture. The ability to talk to people in my own language and use bigger words and be a little witty and, joke back and forth and that kind of thing. And, that may be something that you don't need when you're first moving. Lake Como could work. And again, I think that, I like to be out and about. I mean, if you're just going to stay in your villa with your household staff, then a lot of these places could work. I mean, Lake Como perhaps is the place that stands out to me as a great tax deal, beautiful place, and you can just kind of build your own infrastructure around a home. There are some places around Lake Como that didn't seem incredibly expensive. But for me, Ireland was the one that stood out. And so the Austrias and the Germanys are going to be a little bit harder to get into. They're not going to give you a tax deal. Monaco is, I think, for a certain kind of person. A place like Malta is, for retirees. There's probably a lot of places in Europe that are more focused on retirees. The places where you have, the top culture are going to have high taxes. I think Switzerland and Ireland are the two countries that I've said are a little bit different from Europe and some of the craziness in Europe. The strikes, the anti-wealth policies, all that kind of stuff. And I think they're the two places that I probably felt the most comfortable and that I would like to live on a long-term basis. And that's what I learned from 3 months going back through all the old tax-friendly countries in Europe.